Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Whitehead. Um, I'm currently the chair of the ESIP Semantic Technologies Committee, and I just want to say thanks everyone for coming along to the session, and hopefully we can have some good conversation later on in the session. We have two guest speakers today, Abby Benson and Jonathan Blythe, will be chatting with us. And I want to apologize to both of you because you both just had sessions, I think, talking about a lot of the same things that I expect we'll talk about in here, perhaps in a summarized fashion a little bit just for time. But yeah, apologies for that. I'm really grateful to have you both here, though, and to present the work that you've been working on with your clusters, and then we'll get into some of the discussion points at the end. So hopefully everyone can see the slides. Just a thumbs up from anyone. Just let me know, make sure. Okay, thank you. So yeah, welcome. Yeah, I think we're kind of well underway, so I won't belabor the introductory bits, other than to say, yeah, so there's a link to the Semantic Technologies Committee if anybody's interested. If there's more info, there's a list and the whole ESIP thing. I think most of you are if you haven't, please hit the Google Doc, add relevant details if you like, and please take notes as you see fit. That's sort of the community document that I would expect to use and share later or refer to. So please, jot things down in this document, perhaps at the end, if there are things that you think are worth noting. As I am sort of organizing, I will be crap at taking notes, so I apologize in advance for that as well. So one of the reasons, so I want for this session, one of the things that I'm interested in is sort of looking at what we do as our committee, what our Semantic Technologies Committee works or strives to accomplish, and sort of vision behind it. So promoting research with ontologies and vocabularies, collaborating with other ESIP clusters and members, fostering the sharing and reuse of ontologies. So we have a list of things. These are the things that we sort of strive towards. And I felt like we could probably do a better job of some, certainly the first two. And hence this session. I wanted to have an opportunity, I was hoping to have an opportunity to bring together sort of like minds and discuss some of the sort of pertinent issues, ESIP related, of course, because this is an ESIP meeting, but I think a lot of the issues that present themselves within the ESIP clusters, and certainly our cluster, is that are sort of permeate throughout Earth and environmental sciences in general, and space. Excuse me, I don't mean to leave anyone out. But yeah, I think it sort of permeates across domains. So yeah, hopefully we can, at the end, I want to have a couple talks about some other, as I said, other clusters work and what we've been working on, and then have a discussion and get you into some groups and have a series of questions to sort of, you can either answer, or if you want to just use them as sort of ways to, like, discussion points or things that you use to leap off of and spawn into another topic, I think that would be great. Sort of getting at this idea of where are the issues, where are the sticking points, or where have you had successes, what are your use cases, that type of thing. I'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, so again, as going back to the Earth and environmental sciences related sort of semantics work, or work on vocabularies, I think it seems, to me at least, to be sort of, I don't know if haphazard is the right term, but there are sort of pockets of work, right? And we don't seem to be aligned really, or at least not, in my view, not well. I think it could be perhaps coordinated a bit better, certainly within ESIP. And so just for some context, like the Ag and Climate Cluster, I think they have a session now, if I remember correctly. So if, so apologies if you're there. But they're working on, they're coordinating with the Semantic Harmonization Cluster on wildfire management topics and trying to build out that conceptual model and try to figure out areas where I think they can build functionality into ENVO, the environmental ontology, and some other resources. That's my understanding of their work. Just as a note, there's another cluster called the Semantic Harmonization Cluster, and one of the things that they focus on is trying to take data artifacts or conceptual models or other vocabularies, and trying to sort of harmonize them, right? Get them into a state that they're machine readable, right? And they fit in with in this case either ENVO, the environmental ontology, or SWEET, which is another ontology, is an acronym for the Semantic Web for Earth and Environmental Terminology, and it's been around for a while. I'm sure most of you've heard of it. So circling back to the other semantics-related work within ESIP, the marine data cluster, they recently had an entire session focusing on marine-specific vocabularies and highlighting which ones, from my understanding, which ones were developed and their level of maturity and what they might be useful for. In the soil ontologies and informatics crowd, they had been working on some small ontology patterns, so very small structures, the goal would have been to reuse them across a large number of databases. And now they're looking at scheduling a series of talks from the relevant vocabularies or semantic resources, trying to figure out what's sort of available, what were they intended to, why were they developed, and then what can we do with them now that they're available, even getting into licensing and things like that. I'm sure, and if you've not heard of science on schema.org or SOSO, that's another crowd where they're trying to use the relationships or predicates in schema.org to enhance the search capability for scientific data sets. So trying to figure out where, how that vocabulary can be applied to the more specific information that's usually captured within a data set or scientific data set. And there are loads of others. If you look at the other clusters on ESIP's collaboration page, I think from me anyway, because I've sort of been thinking about this a lot, I can see sort of almost every cluster I look at and I think, I wonder if there would be a metadata profile that would fit that group, or there's a publishing artifact like Dublin Core or DCAT or something, and I wonder if they've thought about that. And hence, I thought this session would be good to try and foster that discussion, or perhaps the awareness. And in that, perhaps through that discussion, then focusing on common threads or their common use cases. So even where we might have two separate domains, so like a big picture, biology and marine or something like that, where there are areas of related topics, but there are also areas where they're quite disparate. Are there common use cases? Are there areas where there could be collaboration, and for whatever reason there just isn't, or isn't yet? So, with that in mind, this is an old image, but I really like this image because I think it sort of captures how I feel a lot of the time. We're trying to find that thing that you have in that moment, especially in the moment where you sort of this information overload, right? That term, and Clay Shirky has a quote which I think is sort of famous now, but he says it's not information overload, it's filter failure, and that really resonates with me, right? How we structure our facets or filters to try and deliver that thing, or provide a mechanism to find those things that we need in whatever moment you need them. And if you sort of tip that on its side and think about how, in this particular slide, there's in New Zealand, there's it's a pest called myrtle rust. So this is just a snippet from a fact sheet. But if we think about all the things that went together to assemble that fact sheet, right, that then is shared with other folks. So what was the research that all years and years of research and observations that have gone behind generating the information there, videos, data, were there intermediate results that are useful to other people and so forth. So not just linking out and figuring out how the things are related, like in a web sense, right? You're putting like an href in to link to something, but actually what are the relationships, or what is the relevant metadata for these different objects, and how might we sort of stitch them together in a more usable fashion, okay? That's just one way to look at it or to think about it. And so these are just some questions that I was thinking of that might be useful for you as we listen to our speakers later, just to provide some context, I suppose, even though you may have your own, and that's fine. But sort of like, yeah, what are there related topics or relevant topics, whether it's cross-domain or data products, right? So domain, I'm treating sort of agnostic. You can have a scientific domain, we can have data products, we can have different sort of facets or areas of interest that we want to try and model or map across. And then do we have similar goals or use cases, right? So a lot of times it's just search or information retrieval. Is that the use case, or are we sort of further along the line in the what's called the semantic spectrum, if you like, sticking with the semantics and the vocabularies undertones? So further off to what's traditionally to the right, which would be more logical models, okay? So from like term lists and what's typically considered a weaker semantic relation to something that's much more stringent. Yeah, and where do we lie in there? Are we really focusing on information retrieval, or are there opportunities to model sort of knowledge in a domain, sort of what's in an expert's head, if you like? Yeah, and then what's available? It feels to me a lot of times like the Wild West in terms of for Earth and environmental and space in those domains, where is one of the things I've been looking at is sort of what's available and how can it be reused, going back to the things that are no longer or that were only published in a paper, let's say, that aren't necessarily web enabled. Okay, but what exists? How does it exist? What form is it in? A useful form, or is it trapped in sort of a PDF, if you like? And then what are the gaps, right? So we have things like Dublin Core that provides metadata entities, and DCAT, which has been revisited recently. GeoSparkle is being revisited now, I think, as we speak. So what's useful from those, and then where are the gaps? Where do we need to fill in our domain knowledge, or where do we need our own sort of vocabulary or vocabularies? Yeah, and when is it appropriate to reuse? This could be as simple as a licensing thing, and when I was thinking of the question, I was thinking more about the semantics of the terms, right? Are they relevant here? Are they appropriate here? But it could be as simple as am I allowed to use this? And then how might the disparate knowledge be made interoperable? Or as I mentioned before, you might have areas of interaction, and I'm talking within a domain or a set of domains or some common threads, but then where are there areas that just aren't going to be because they're very perhaps stovepiped, or they're very specific to a certain domain, and trying to sort of decouple that or untangle that. And are there patterns? So maybe more on a modeling side, are there patterns we can use for common concepts? One that I like to use is in exploration geology. There's the notion of a seal, which is just a confining layer, really. And in hydrogeology, we have the notion of a confining layer where you might have an aquifer. And the main difference is really depth and then the thing you're confining. But conceptually, it's a layer that's not allowing anything to permeate through, or permeate at a rate where it's quite slow, right? So those types of concepts, can we model that as a pattern that gets reused and incorporated for each domain? So that was a bit of an out there modeling question, but I just thought I'd add it as a point in case that caught anybody's interest. So with that, I would like to invite Abby. I'll stop sharing. And Abby Benson is the chair of the Biological Data Standards Cluster. And if you just went to her talk in the previous session, I apologize. But she is going to give us a rundown of what they've been working on that cluster. And then Jonathan you'll go afterwards, all right? So please, Abby, I'll mute myself and be quiet and go for it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for the invitation. And yes, my apologies to anyone who is in the session earlier today. This will all be very familiar. So my name is Abby Benson. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm the U.S. Node Manager for the Ocean Biodiversity Information System and the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And my co-leads for this cluster are Diana Lascala-Grunwald at MBARI, Robert McGuinn, associated with NOAA, and Aaron Satterwhite at UCSD. So the way this cluster got started was there were some of us that were discussing, we didn't know what standards different people were using in their systems. And so we kicked off this workshop. It was hosted by the Integrated Ocean Observing System and the Earth and ESIP. And so we had a biological data standards workshop with 90 participants. And we had several themes that we discussed. It was intended to be in person, but ended up being a virtual event. And so we didn't really get to dig into everything as much as we would have liked to. But we had some themes. And the theme I'm really going to focus on from that workshop today is building a community of practice. So the problem, as was identified by someone at the workshop, is the diversity of biological data and seeming lack of overarching community standards makes working with biological data challenging. And there are lots of standards out there that people can use for biological data, but people are not always using them. They don't know that they exist. And so the biological data community in the US could benefit from guidance, best practice documentation, training, and community building. And so with this sort of framing and problem in mind, we kicked off the ESIP Biological Data Standards Cluster with the goal to maximize data relevance and utility for understanding changes in biodiversity over time. If this sounds of interest to you, we would love to have you join us. We meet monthly on the first Thursday of the month at 1400 Eastern. We have a channel in the ESIP Slack. It's called Biodata, and we have a wiki and a mailing list. One thing I'd like to do is point out sort of where the clusters kind of overlap or don't. So with the ESIP Biological Data Standards cluster, this cluster is for any biological data standards across domains, so marine, terrestrial, freshwater, really digging in, so kind of broad in that way. I have a working group that's called the Standardizing Marine Biological Data Working Group, and that one is specifically focused on marine data, marine biological data, and applying Darwin Core to it. And then there's the ESIP Marine Data Cluster, and obviously they are dealing with data that's more than just the biological data, but specifically marine. So there are some overlaps, but the differences too, separate areas. During one of the first meetings of the cluster, we had a Slido and we asked the cluster, how will this cluster be successful? And so the responses we got were increasing awareness and adoption of biological data standards, enhancing widespread interest in standards, providing clear guidance to someone outside of the cluster, and becoming a clearinghouse for guidance related to biological data standards. So with these sort of goals in mind for how we could make this cluster successful, we started off with producing a primer for biological data. I will admit that we had originally wanted to do a decision tree. Decision trees are hard. So we kind of scaled it back a little bit and made it something like a TLDR, too long didn't read, for you to just kind of whet your appetite for standards for biological data. And so the aim with this was to assist data managers who are unfamiliar with biological data standards with understanding what's out there. So going back to how we would be successful, we really want this to be useful to people outside of ESIP. And so that's where we're trying to focus, even though we're kind of working on it a lot in the ESIP community. And the audience for this primer are data managers tasked with managing biological data. And so this primer has been published. It's version 1, so we do intend to update it as we learn more and and figure out that new things need to be added to the primer, make adjustments. I think actually from our session this morning, I already know of some adjustments I want to make to it based on what we worked on this morning. One thing I do want to highlight are the decisions from the process that we went through in the cluster to get to this primer. We had originally started with the data type, but decided to kind of back out from specific data types like phytoplankton data or different methods for observing species. we talked a lot about the audience, and we really wanted to focus in on data managers specifically for this primer. We did discuss having maybe a separate primer that would be for principal investigators or researchers. We are looking at observations specifically, so observations of species in dermacore known as an occurrence of a species. So that's really what we're trying to focus in on with this primer. It was really important to the cluster that that we make clear that standardizing doesn't require sharing of the data, because not everyone wants to share their data, but it's still worth applying standards to your data, even for yourself. And it tends to have a bit of a marine focus because of the workshop, and the people involved in the cluster are pretty marine focused. So we are always looking to expand to terrestrial and freshwater folks. So what we've done so far is, we have the primer published. We've published it to the Data Management Training Clearinghouse, so it's available there. We announced it on social media. We have a blog post in the works for the ESIP blog, and we'll send out an email notification once that's up. We would like to engage a graphic designer because we know it could look a little bit better than it does right now. And we'd like to print hard copies. So we have to think about how we would do that, because the shape of it is not great for printing, but printing hard copies to take to conferences should we ever go back to in-person conferences, and assess how to make it more useful and any companion products to go with it, which is something we focused on in this morning's session. And so with that, I'm going to take just a few minutes to walk through the primer. Let me bring it up. So this is the primer, and hopefully everyone can see it. You'll let me know if you can't see it, right?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thank you. So one thing we wanted to put right at the top is that you should use standards whether or not you share your data. We are trying to make clear that this is for data managers specifically, and providing the value proposition, which is that using standards for your biological observation data means we can understand patterns at scales greater than one project, research group, or organization. And we really think that's the power of using standards. On the left-hand side, we have a question that a data manager might ask themselves. Do you want to provide context and understandability to your data? And then on the right-hand side are some ways that you could meet that goal, some standards and some example repositories that use those standards listed. And so as we move down, we have other questions that a data manager might consider, like, do you want to integrate your data with other data? And then some ways to accomplish that. Do you want to make your data interoperable? And some controlled vocabularies and taxonomic authorities that can assist with that. Do you want to share your data on the web, and highlighting some ways to make that possible? And then do you want to make your data software ready, with some suggested ways to make that possible? Here we try to highlight that you can mix and match these standards in any way you see fit, but that certain places require certain combinations of standards. So you might consider that when you're if you want your data to go there. And then we have a link to our wiki, and also a link out to fairsharing.org, which, this primer obviously is not all of the standards that are out there. And we didn't want to recreate fairsharing.org. There's already a place for that. So we just want to make, make people aware that that's there, and they can go there to learn more about other standards that aren't listed here on the primer. And one other thing to note is that there are a lot of acronyms because we wanted to make this easy to digest. So we do provide links off to these so people can learn more information about these different standards and the full way that the acronyms represent. So that's all I have for you guys today.
Awesome. Thanks for that. We have time for questions if anybody has any. Well, I have one. I'll start, and please unmute yourself and jump in if you have any. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the other side. So like the publishing side or the publisher side. So one of the things that in a past project when we were looking at trying to develop ways that to standardize, like in a journal, how you standardize like species observation or something along those lines, right? Sorry, I'm not a biologist, but that you know, and a lot of times when you're talking about an identification or a sighting or like mRNA encoding, right? Trying to do taxonomic matches. There's sort of a series of things that you do, and they're kind of all quite related. It's sort of like the epitome of like a control vocabulary. You're just trying to tell somebody what they found and where, and what was the process by which they found it or utilized. And so they're quite short publication. Anyway, the point is, do you have any thoughts on sort of that other side of the publication side, let's say, or the journal publication side, about providing a standardized framework or something along those lines?
Yeah, so are you asking if I have any ideas about what publishers should require as far as if you're going to publish your data along with your publication? Is that the question?
Not just with your publication, but even just so you can publish data with your publication, right? But even if you're just trying to publish like a new species or being able to make that available, not just in a PDF, but like in a web enabled, you know, in a machine actionable format as well, right? So not just JATS, but something that's machine action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a lot of work happening in TADWIG, which is where the Darwin Core standard is overseen, you know, in that area of publishing taxonomic treatments and making those available in machine readable ways. So I think there are some things happening there. I don't know that I'm the best person to talk about how to do that, but I know that there are a lot of publishers that now have sort of GBIF, for instance, listed as a place where you can publish the data so that it's accessible along with your publication. So I know that those requirements are starting to come into place.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I was just curious. Does anybody else have any questions? I've been monopolizing the mic a bit. Okay. Well, there's some good points in the chat too. Thanks, everyone. And with that, thanks, Abby. Virtual clap, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jonathan, you all good, right? You all good? So sorry, this is Jonathan Blythe with the Discovery. Is it Blythe? Am I pronouncing it right?
That's right.
Right. With the Discovery Cluster, on behalf of the Discovery Cluster. And with that, yeah, go for it. You take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. Oh, you don't want to see that. So I did prepare some slides just for this this presentation. This morning, as I was thinking about conversations I've had with the Semantic committee recently, and there's, and also listening to the presentations before me, there's a lot of interesting overlap that I think we could delve into further in the breakouts. But to start, sorry once again for those of you who did attend the session last at 11, but here's some background on what usage-based discovery cluster has been doing. We are trying to understand this concept of usage-based discovery, and we did so by building an application. You know, the royal we, I had nothing to do with this. This was at NASA. And that's based in turn on a very simple knowledge graph that has this structure. So we have at the top level science topics. It's a controlled vocabulary. And from there, you can then link to a number of applications, which are like websites or models, or you can link to research articles from the peer review literature. And then finally, after you go through that, and the way it's visualized in the website is you get a landing page like you're seeing here for M-bond pole to pole. So there's one connection with what Abby's doing. This is some of her work. And then you can find the data sets. These are all the GBIF data sets that are linked to through that, that resource or website. So This is the usage-based discovery, the science topic list that we've converged on, and it's intended to be broad. And that's the first level of connection to the semantic committee is we have a vocabulary. So we are, already, and from day one, we had people like Beth Huffer working on this with us. Although I think the connection moving forward is going to be a little different. Assuming this is kind of somewhat settled, what we'd like to do is find other connections with the semantic committee. And so let me just go back and describe some of the evolution of our cluster in this tool. It has this simple model. We started with applications, so like models and websites that NASA hosts. Then we took a pivot and started exploring and harvesting research articles because there's this good practice of DOI citations. I see there's a chat. Let's see. And then the next pivot had been, well, we got so many research articles, it's really kind of filling up the application. Let's do some machine learning and cluster the articles into research subtopics, if you will, things that researchers are currently performing. Then you find the article, and then you can find the data sets associated with the article. So that's kind of the evolution that we've taken where we're at right now. And may I propose that there's a further step of evolution that we could take with the semantic committee. My next slide, hopefully. Okay, so just starting back at the top level, what I think I've heard is that there's semantic resources like an ontology or a thesaurus that are reusable. So they are much like the data sets in the canonical model. And why can't we just provide discovery of those ontologies or resources? I think that could provide a very useful framework. And this is another linkage back to Abby's primer. That's essentially what the primer is doing, is it's providing discovery of reusable metadata resources. So here, potentially we could build a tool that would automate or make live the primer in in a discoverable mode. What are we discovering though? That's kind of the question. What is the application layer here? And that's kind of the open question I have for the community, and kind of open up to the discussion. See, do I have another slide here? Okay, so here's a little more food for thought in trying to fill in those question marks. You can think of the science topics as your domain. If you're thinking about a triplet, in Protege, you're defining the domain and range. So like climate is a domain of research. And then the type of application serves as its range. So we're looking at climate models, so in blue models, or soil property samples. That in itself then defines the kinds of research articles or data, or perhaps ontologies that you'd be able to discover through the tool. So if we take that concept of range further, here's a full list of semantic ranges that we might use to define the relationships in usage-based discovery. And down here at the bottom are data. This is somewhat confusing. How can data be a range when the predicate, I suppose, the thing you're discovering are data themselves? Whether there are examples of data usage for different data sets. And an example here would be like a repository has selected the use of ontology or thesaurus in its catalog. So that's a perfect example of a data range. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. I think it's food for thought, and I'll leave it now to the breakouts and questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Does anyone have any questions for Jonathan, either here or in the chat? Again, I have one, so I'll launch into it in case anybody's having some, on-off mute issues, right? So I was, I'm really captivated by what you described with your usage-based idea. Okay, and one of the things that had occurred to me is the different ways by which you might think about usage. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to sort of turn it slightly and think about, what data products could I use with this tool, right? Like if I wanted to try and build a visualization, but I need a specific type of file, or I need a specific parameter in like netcdf or something like that. Okay, so in terms of tool capability or software capability, right? So which is a different type of but flushed out, right?
Okay.
And being able, so once you do the transect, you're saying, okay, well, this was linked to this piece of data, and this piece of data has these properties, but is also usable by these tools that I know, that I'm aware of, or that I've used in the past, or something like that. Adding a sort of perhaps another layer of personalization. I was just wondering if you had any. Did that come up at all in your conversations, or was there? Yeah, just curious.
We talked about this before, and I did look into tool match.
Yeah.
The key difference, I think, is that this is lightweight. So we're trying to make as concise a data model as possible. So I showed you evolutions where we could add flourishments, but we do so incrementally, so I think that'll help it become scalable, not only within your project, because it can become quite unwieldy to document all the tools and how they're used in a single application, but it's also about the cross-domain, interdisciplinary. There's so many different domains in earth science. You'd have to have a lot of people working on that approach to converge on a full solution.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah. Sorry, anybody else? Okay. Well, virtual clap. Thanks for coming over and re-presenting some of the stuff you just did. I very much appreciate it. So now, according to our schedule, I was just going to have a few minutes while I sort out the breakout rooms to open it up and see if there were any questions, just general questions. Is there any areas where there's maybe an opportunity to have an enhanced understanding, or something that wasn't clear, anything like that? We'll just take a few minutes before I explain what we're going to do as we go into the what's it called, discussion rooms, breakout rooms. Sorry. Okay, and just a moment. Okay, so for the breakout rooms, in the Google Doc, I have basically a series of questions that you can go through and answer them if you like, or provide some statements. You can use them just to sort of get you and your group talking about your experiences and the types of perhaps modeling that you're interested in, or you have done, or areas that you see need improvement, or whatever. So you can use them as a sort of starting point to launch into your own discussion, or you can sort of take them, as I typically do, is a bit more literally, and go through and sort of answer best I can. It's completely up to you, but that's what I'll ask you to do in the breakout groups, is have those discussions. There should be a set of questions, the same set of questions in each group. So once you get put in your groups, look at the number and match up with it, would be easier, and then just document the, I guess, more salient points of your discussion. And I'll just say first, if you could introduce yourselves. I just provided a little snippet there at the beginning for everyone. Just, I'm not sure, I'm sure a lot of us know each other, but I think that'd be good just to make sure, you know, break the ice a little bit. And so with that, Patty, whenever you're ready, just send us through. We're going to take, looks like about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the conversation, and then we'll regroup back here and have a bit of a reporting session before we head out. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes for the breakout rooms, and I went ahead and let Zoom just kind of pair people, you know, put people in the rooms. So, and if anybody wants to switch, obviously you can if you want to. But
awesome.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Can we somehow provide discovery of where semantic resources like ontologies are being used in the community? We have repositories of these things. That's what Rowan was speaking to in his work. But he, as a repository manager, he doesn't really know how to recommend them to his users or where they're actually being used. So there is a complementary need with the repositories to provide discovery of usage. I think fundamentally that's my takeaway, and I think that's something we can continue to work on with this committee.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the reuse, and sort of wrap it all together. There's the trust component and who is using it and how are they using it and how does that get pushed back or fed back through? Where's that feedback loop? That's interesting. Thanks for that. Let's see. Is anybody? I think next one would be group 3 or room 3, room 3. Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? Well, you guys took good notes.
I could just say something quick, and then I think Kate's still here too, and Kate had a great use case. So yeah, we just introduced ourselves and said a little bit about our backgrounds and why we were interested in the Semtech cluster. And I think we focused a lot on this particular usability case around the CMAX vocabulary. And Kate, you might want to just say a bit more. I would love if you could just share a few points about that.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't realize we were in room 3. I guess I wasn't paying attention to that part, but yeah, so I work on the Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard, otherwise known as CMEX, which some people here are already familiar with, I think. And in a nutshell, I think my issue is that, you know, it was published in 2012, but basically just as like a text document. And though we're making some updates to some of our terms and definitions that describes ecological units and the ecology rather of with a heavy bent towards, you know, mapping out various habitats in aquatic environments. And so we're making some changes to it based on like feedback from our user community. And so I am looking to created an ontology that is, you know, machine readable, and that will help me be able to manage tracking changes between different versions. But since coming to ESIP, I will say I've become much more aware of how this could how it could connect with other ontologies and kind of contribute to perhaps like a whole realm of like, I don't know, interacting between different ontologies and different terms and things that are used by different groups, because we don't use them all the same. So I do think it is important for us to get our terminology out there and have it accessible. to people.
Awesome. Thank you. Actually, does anybody have any, I have a question. Does anybody else have any questions before I drone on? Well, Kate, so is CMEX, is that the same as the CMECS?
Yes, I believe so. And I know I'm seeing Pierre's comment in the side, and yes, and I recall that Envo has used some CMEX terms, and yes, and so I'm kind of hoping, because this is all completely new to me, I have a lot of questions about how to best structure the ontology and perhaps what other resources might be available then for us to kind of make it, put it out there and make it accessible to people too. So
it's, yeah, I was going to ask, because it's so it's available as RDF as part of the USGS thesaurus, and we can chat offline if you like, but I built mappings to Suite, and it looks, yeah, so that means that there's going to be bindings to Suite and Envo. We can chat about this offline, but it's just a, yeah, something I didn't know if you were aware.
Yeah, because I know about, I'm aware of USGS, and I don't know if Fran's still on here. I think that she was on here earlier, but
Right
yes,
on.
something that's we haven't really kind of gotten into, even though there have been these other efforts going on and stuff like that, but I'm kind of ready to jump in and work on that.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, right on. Sorry, I lost track. Where am I? Anybody from room 5? Oh, sorry. If there are no further questions, I was going to jump to room 5.
Don has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. I'm not even looking at the hand. Sorry, Don, please go.
That's okay. Just a quick question, Kate. Is the CMEX community relating things at all to like the Aquatic Science and Fisheries Abstracts thesaurus, the ASFA thesaurus? Because there's a lot of, there's a lot of potential overlap there, and that's another one of those sort of international underutilized resources, maybe.
Not that I'm aware of, although it could well be that there might be. I'm not familiar with that, and I'm not sure if you're. But it could well be that there are people out there using CMEX who contribute to that. But
okay, I just was just curious if that was one of the things on, because I know very little about CMEX other than a general picture. So I'd be interested in hearing more about it at some point.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Anyone else before we move on? Now I'm looking for hands. All right. Group 5, I believe, is next. Is anyone in group 5, which I believe was Damien, Don, Doug, Phils, and Pierre. Hi, Pierre. Sorry, I didn't even know you were here today. My bad. Until you start talking. Does anybody have anything they want to share?
Yeah, sure. I can summarize if that's okay. I'll say that, and then I have to find the notes. Okay, great. So yeah, we were coincidentally an ocean-focused bunch too inside in that bunch. And to answer the questions, there's a lot of drive now for like a lot of regions, nations, and large data structures to share data because of the UN decade, but also just in general. Things are happening, like in Europe, EMODNet is centralizing, and CEI went through its centralization process. Ocean Networks Canada representative in there too. And there's a desire, people are marking up data using terminologies from GCMD to the NERF vocabularies, some ontologies for more expressive stuff. But one of the things that we're noticing is that we're not necessarily coordinating strategically. And we have a lot of new talent coming into the system. New people are being hired, but they're not necessarily being trained up in these things. Or there's like a gap in the sense of how do I actually become a power user of this so that I can help my local initiative mark up its data and semantically qualify it with the right resource at the right level of expressivity for whatever purpose is being addressed. And I think that's our chance here. And this is just picking up on what the previous group has said. ESIP's a cool place to do this because it has this vibe, this atmosphere of just collegiality. So I think if we set up the same way we did for the cryosphere, marine-focused harmonization cluster, we can get that sweet CMEX, ENVO alignment thing going, and also pull in some of those people the people who are interested in this from our various data science schools or infrastructures to train them, because what we're lacking is co-editors of these ontologies. It's generally left to like a small team which is overcommitted and can't field all the requests. I know in Envo we're drowning on these, and I can't keep up. But we need to train more people to be able to build out these community resources and keep the quality, importantly, like because automated checks, etc. So Doug also pointed out like the need to link into things like science and schema.org or schema.org based systems, so that these semantics aren't just sitting there, like the data sets are well described, but they're also being shared out in some way that a lot of people understand that has good market share. Yeah, so we identified a whole bunch of systems that people do use. But again, it's like a question of how do we mix and match them right along that semantic spectrum that you mentioned, Brandon, to have the right impact at the right time, allocating the right level of effort. In terms of what was missing, again, like Doug, particularly drawing from Doug's expertise in implementing stuff across multiple infrastructures, validation that things are actually described well with shackle and checks. I think that's something that not a lot of people do when they're implementing semantics, and sometimes it's not necessary, but sometimes it's important. And a nice way to sort of normalize the exports. Are we exporting RDF, etc. Trying to get that sort of socio-technical alignment. We say this a lot in the UN systems, because you need to have a kind of socialization of things such that it becomes normal behavior. It's a cultural change. I think we need to coordinate about, okay, what is a realistic level to expect for semantic deployment in modern systems, and where do we want to go in the next 5 to 10 years? Yeah. And the risks and the worst things is that there's like over-engineering or over-stovepiping solutions. That's something that really worries us, because there are brilliant things being generated, but then we kind of defeat the purpose of the interoperability that semantic tech promises if we over-engineer the implementation or the usage of those. So I think, it takes a little bit more time up front, but we avoid a lot of semantic debt down the line if we kind of crosswalk these. Right, that's more or less it. Anything to add, team? All right, cool. Back to you, Brian.
Ah, great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions about that? I'm conscious of time, so maybe we'll skip questions and just head on to, I think it's room 7, which was, yeah, go ahead, Abby, sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so we boiled everything down to kind of one comment, because we thought time might be a little tight. And so what we wanted to bring from our breakout group was just that these topics are not given enough resources or consideration, and we risk losing our history and our data because of it. And so I don't know what the answer is, but Pierre talking about him being, completely overwhelmed with, Envo, I think that's the case throughout our community, because it's not really valued. And so, but I think we have this conversation a lot. I'm not sure how we get past it, but I think that's really where the trouble lies.
Awesome, thank you. Was that everyone? Did I miss one? Are we good? All right, I'll take that as a good. So we have a couple minutes. I just wanted to say thanks everyone for participating. I thought I got a lot out of it, and I want to say thanks to everyone for making it a great session. And yeah, enjoy the next one. Take care. See you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon, for organizing.